welcome to my YouTube channel. In a previous video I've already discussed one of the most interesting ideas of Friedrich Nietzsche, which is his idea of the Apollonian and Dionysian spirit. So in the previous video I've tried to explain both concepts, so if you're not familiar with these concepts then please consider watching this video first, and we'll link it somewhere on your screen. If you are however familiar with the Dionysian and Apollonian concepts, then I think this video might interest you, because I delve a bit deeper into the implications of these concepts. And the main question that I try to answer is whether we have forgotten about Dionysus. So in his first ever published book, The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche defined both concepts, the Apollonian and the Dionysian. And he illustrated if both the Apollonian and Dionysian spirit operate in unity, they can produce something that is truly unique. However, as I discussed as well, Nietzsche claimed that Greek tragedy met a tragic death resulting from an opposition to the Dionysian spirit, an opposition which, according to Nietzsche, was characterized by Socrates and the Socratic ideal of knowledge and the idealization of the rational. Nietzsche, however, believed that our underemphasis of the Dionysian spirit had implications for many aspects of our lives. In this video I will discuss these implications and illustrate how the Apollonian and Dionysian concepts relate to several aspects of our lives, such as art, education, culture and myths. As a result of this discussion we might question, as Nietzsche did as well, whether in our modern world we have forgotten about Dionysus and the Dionysian spirit. At the same time, I will also illustrate why Nietzsche believed that a rebirth of tragedy and the Dionysian spirit was actually possible, and how this discussion of the Dionysian and Apollonian spirit would become an important theme throughout Nietzsche's future works, as well as how this idea influenced other thinkers. So, for the first subject, which is art, it is interesting to note that Nietzsche was heavily influenced by Arthur Schopenhauer. We can see a clear link between the importance Schopenhauer attached to art, which I've also made a video which you can see on your screen right now, and Nietzsche's definition of Dionysiac art. Friedrich Nietzsche, like Schopenhauer, observed that art can be a way to transcend the suffering inherent to life, at least for a moment. So he wrote, "Dionysiac art too wishes to convince us of the eternal delight of existence, but we are to seek that delight not in phenomena themselves, but behind phenomena. It wishes to acknowledge that everything that comes into being must be prepared to face a sorrowful end. It forces us to look at the terrors of the individual existence, yet we are not to be petrified with fear. Metaphysical consolation rests us momentarily from the bustle of changing forms. Art will then result in the creation of some sort of unity, as indicated in the table on your screen right now as well. Unity is a characteristic of this Dionysian spirit." Nietzsche wrote, "For a brief moment we really become the primal essence itself, and feel its unbounded lust for existence and delight in existence. As a result, according to Nietzsche, we will be glad to be alive," he wrote. "For all our pity and terror we are happy to be alive, not as individuals, but as the single living thing merged with its creative delight." Friedrich Nietzsche moreover believed that our emphasis on the Socratic, Apollonian, and therefore the rational had far-reaching consequences for education and culture in our modern age. Everything, Nietzsche argued, was built upon this Socratic ideal, which Nietzsche also termed Alexandrian culture. Nietzsche wrote, "The whole of our modern world is caught up in the net of Alexandrian culture, and its ideal is theoretical man, armed with the highest powers of knowledge and working in the service of science, whose archetype and progenitor is Socrates." As a consequence, education is based upon this idea as well, and any alternative methods not based upon the Socratic ideal are discouraged. Therefore, Nietzsche wrote, "All of our educational methods take their bearings from this ideal. Any other form of existence has a hard struggle to survive alongside it, and is in the end tolerated rather than encouraged." There exists, however, according to Nietzsche, an urge for something beyond the theoretical man, mainly because being solely based on science, the world of theoretical man has its limits. Nietzsche wrote, We need only compare him with Socrates to see that modern man has begun to sense the limitations of the Socratic delight in knowledge, and yearns for a shore from the wide and barren sea of knowledge. As a result, Nietzsche believed that we have now come to admire the non-theoretical man, i.e. the man filled with the spirit of Dionysus. He wrote, "Non-theoretical man is incredible and astonishing to modern man." So in the previous video I've also discussed the importance of myths in relation to the works of Joseph Campbell. And Joseph Campbell, he observed that myths serve an important role as a bridge to the unconscious. Although myths are not true in the usual way in which the term is used, they are true in a different way. They can have an important function as a metaphor, thereby illustrating a much deeper truth compared to what we're able to comprehend at first. We do, however, no longer believe in myths because for us to believe in something, it has to be scientifically true. And as a result of this development, we've lost an important bridge to our unconscious. And it appears as if Joseph Campbell as well was influenced by Friedrich Nietzsche's idea from his book The Birth of Tragedy. Nietzsche believed as well, because of our idealization of the theoretical man, that we've kind of lost the ability to comprehend myths in the ways that previous generations did. Therefore, he wrote, "In all likelihood, almost everyone, having subjected himself to a rigorous examination, will feel so undermined by the critical historical spirit of our culture that it's only by scholarly means and mediating abstractions that the former existence of myth can be made credible." Like Joseph Campbell, Nietzsche also observed that myths are extremely important for a society. Joseph Campbell emphasized the importance of myths as a bridge between the conscious and the unconscious world, and Nietzsche addressed the importance of myths as a creative force that could unify a culture, thereby also illustrating this connection between Dionysus, unity, and myths. Nietzsche wrote, "Yet without myth, all culture loses its healthy and natural creative power. Only a horizon surrounded by myths can unify an entire cultural movement. Myths can help the Apollonian world to comprehend and accept the struggles of life." Nietzsche wrote, "Myth alone rescues all the powers of imagination and the Apolline dream from their aimless wanderings. The image of myth must be the demonic guardians, omnipresent and unnoticed, which protect the growth of the young mind and guide man's interpretation of his life and struggles." As we can see from this present discussion, the Apollonian spirit is thoroughly represented in our modern world, with our emphasis on the individual, moderation, beauty, the rational, and order. And it can be argued that the elements present in the god Dionysus, characterized by unity, joy, horror, myth, ritual, and chaos, are underrepresented in our modern world. As a result, we might ask whether we have forgotten about Dionysus. Nietzsche observed that, driven by the ideas of Socrates, art has declined as a result of the lack of a Dionysian element. Nietzsche wrote, "The influence of Socrates, up to our own times and beyond, has spread across posterity like a shadow lengthening in the evening sun, and how it has continually led to the regeneration of art in the broadest and deepest metaphysical sense." Nietzsche questioned whether this influence of Socrates, besides having a negative influence upon art, might not also be a manifestation of the decline of culture in a much broader sense. Therefore, he wrote, "Could not that very Socratism be a symptom of decline, fatigue, infection, and the anarchical dissolution of the instincts?" Nietzsche even claimed that our emphasis upon science and the Apolline might be a form of cowardice and escape from the real truths of life, which could only be manifested in the Dionysian spirit. He wrote, "What does all of science mean as a symptom of life? Might the scientific approach be nothing but fear, flight from pessimism, a subtle form of self-defense against the truth, and morally speaking something like cowardice and falsehood?" From these arguments, as well as from the previous examples of the implications of a lack of a Dionysian spirit upon art, education, culture, as well as myths, it is quite possible to argue that we have forgotten about Dionysus in our modern world. However, Nietzsche argued, "We can never escape the Dionysian, and everything will once again be judged by him." Therefore he wrote, "As in the teaching of the great Heraclitus of Ephesus, all things move in a double orbit. Everything that we now call culture, education, and civilization will one day appear before the infallible judge Dionysus. As a result, after discussing the birth and decline of tragedy in his book The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche also claimed that the rebirth of tragedy and the Dionysian spirit was at hand. He wrote, "Yes, my friends, join me in my faith in this Dionysiac life and the rebirth of tragedy. The age of Socratic man is past. Crown yourselves with ivy, grasp the thyrsus, and do not be amazed of tigers and panthers lie down fawning at your feet. Now dare to be tragic man, for you will be redeemed. You shall join the Dionysiac procession from India to Greece." Nietzsche admired philosophers such as Immanuel Kant and Arthur Schopenhauer for indicating the problems that a society solely based on the logical would have. He wrote, "The tremendous courage and wisdom of Kant and Schopenhauer carried off the most difficult victory over the optimism that lurked within the essence of logic, which in turn forms the basis of culture. This optimism was characterized by a belief that science and logic would be sufficient to contend with all the mysteries of our existence." He wrote, "Where that optimism had believed that all the mysteries of the world could be known and explained, relying on apparently innocuous aeterna veritatis, not so good Latin, and had treated space, time, and causality as utterly unconditional and universally valid laws. By acknowledging the inherent deficit of logic and reason, Nietzsche believed that Kant and Schopenhauer paved a way for the rebirth of tragedy and the spirit of Dionysus. I believe that among others we can add Friedrich Nietzsche himself, as well as Joseph Campbell and also Carl Jung, to the list of thinkers who addressed this deficit and therefore also opened our world to the spirit of Dionysus. Nietzsche believed that once our culture would once again be touched by the spirit of Dionysus, this would have far-reaching positive implications. Therefore he wrote, "But what changes come upon the weary desert of our culture, so darkly described when it is touched by the magic of Dionysus. A storm seizes everything, decrepit, rotten, broken, stunted, shrouds it in a whirling red cloud of dust and carries it into the air like a vulture. In vain confusion we seek for all that is vanished. For what we see has risen as if from beneath the earth into gold light, so full and green, so luxuriantly alive, immeasurable and filled with yearning." And it is clear from these quotes of Friedrich Nietzsche how passionate he was about the rebirth of tragedy and the Dionysian spirit. As a result, it is of no surprise that this theme, so passionately presented in the works of the still young Nietzsche, who was 28 at the time The Birth of Tragedy was published, it would also be present throughout his later works as well. We can clearly observe that this discussion of Friedrich Nietzsche of these two opposites, the Dionysian and Apollonian, and the negative consequences of a lack of the Dionysian spirit is present in most of his important ideas. One such example is his discussion of the last man. Nietzsche believed, for example, that our societies had been degrading partly because we are no longer embracing our chaotic Dionysian side. And he illustrated this through his concept of the last man, who considers every form of chaos as something bad, but thereby misses out on the most important parts of life as well. Another example, which pertains to a significant degree to Nietzsche's disregard of the Socratic ideal, is Nietzsche's idea of the three metamorphoses of the spirit. The highest ideal of this transformation is represented by the child, who can slay the dragon, partly represented by the Socratic ideal. I've made a separate video about these three metamorphoses of the spirit, which I'll link somewhere on your screen right now. Moreover, besides being a major influence on his later works, I believe that Nietzsche's invention of the Dionysian and Apollonian concepts was also an important source of inspiration for other thinkers. Two in particular come to mind, who are Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell. I have already indicated the link between Nietzsche's emphasis on the importance of myths and the importance attached to myths by Joseph Campbell. I believe that a major theme present throughout the works of Joseph Campbell was an attempt to reinstall in us this Dionysian spirit through a rebirth of myth. As Joseph Campbell himself indicated, "The modern hero deed must be that of questing to bring to light again the lost Atlantis of the coordinated soul. The coordinated soul being equally touched by the spirit of Apollo as well as Dionysus." Another thinker that comes to mind is, as I indicated, Carl Jung. I think we can equate the Apollonian with the spirit of the times and the Dionysian with the spirit of the depths, which are two important concepts of Carl Jung's works as well. Carl Jung argued that the divine child can be created by uniting chaos and order, i.e. uniting Apollo and Dionysus. He wrote, "You open the gates of the soul to let the dark flood of chaos flow into your order and meaning. If you marry the order to the chaos, you produce the divine child, the supreme meaning beyond meaning and meaninglessness." So I think to conclude, we can be really grateful to Nietzsche for providing us with two unique new concepts, Dionysian and Apollonian. And as discussed throughout this video, as well as the previous video, these concepts, they relate to art, but also to many other aspects of life. At the same time, they continued to have an important influence on Nietzsche's ideas throughout his later life, as well as the ideas of other great thinkers. So the Apollonian spirit represents individualism, moderation, beauty, rationality and order, whereas the Dionysian spirit is characterized by unity, joy, horror, myths and rituals, as well as chaos. According to Nietzsche, we started to forget about the Dionysian spirit since the teachings of Socrates, whose ideas, mainly influenced by knowledge and rationality, directly opposed the Dionysian. Nietzsche believed that this opposition to the Dionysian spirit had other far-reaching consequences. He wrote, "Could not that very Socratism be a symptom of decline, fatigue, infection, and the anarchical dissolution of the instincts?" Nietzsche, however, he was optimistic that the suppression of the Dionysian spirit would not last forever. He observed that several thinkers, such as Kant and Schopenhauer, started to break down the Socratic wall. Perhaps through our own efforts, however small they may be, we can contribute to the reunification of the Dionysian and Apollonian spirit. Otherwise, as Nietzsche argued as well, the spirit of Dionysus will return to us soon enough. Everything that we now call culture, education and civilization will one day appear before the infallible judge, Dionysus. So yeah, thank you for watching. If you thought this discussion was interesting, then please let me know. And if you would like to see more of these kinds of videos, then please also consider subscribing to this YouTube channel. Yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video as well.